Hey everybody, Mark Greenwald here. Glad to be back with you for another session of 12-note design. Hopefully we have some more information coming up here for you that you may have not known about or want to learn more about, and that's music theory. And we're going to get started by kind of starting with looking at where chords come from that go together well to write a song, and the reason behind why there's so many notes, but yet which ones work together, which ones make up certain chords. And I think the goal today is basically just to get into the C major scale or the major scale and find out where that came from. So to get started, I wanted to talk about the reason we have the different notes. If I had a violin, there's no frets on a violin, right? So it's almost the case of analog to digital is what I was is the analogy I'd like to show. So an A note, there's an octave to that where the frequency doubles, and you slide up to. So that's an octave whenever you get the frequency to be doubled. So since there's a sliding scale there, there's an infinite number of notes. In other words, I could, in all of those notes. So I think the analogy that I'd like to make is that if you had digitized that, what's the resolution that makes it the best? And at some point they could have made that into a 10-note scale, which would have been kind of like our decimal system based on 10. But at some point they decided that 12 was the number. And I'm not going to tell you why, because I don't think I know why. But when they did that, and once again I'm going to go to an A note here. On a guitar, this is now has the steps of those notes, and the octave ends up being up here where you have the double, a lot of times the double dots. These are pretty equally spaced, so they end up being what's called a half step between them. So once you get to the 12th note, that is your octave. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 13 starts it all again. So there's 12 notes, hence 12-note design. So all music in popular culture, at least, there's obviously some other cultures that have some different scales that they use that are different, but we all use this 12-note scale, and like I said, thus everything is designed from using these 12 notes. So on a keyboard, we have the same thing. So I'm going to start with a C. If you go up 12 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you're at B, and then the 13 becomes the C. All right? So that's our starting point. There's 12 notes. There's kind of a reason that they took the 12 and divided it into two different parts. But let me get my numbers written here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Now what they did, for whatever reason, to make life easy or to make life more difficult for people that are new getting into reading and writing music, is they divide this into 7 notes and 5 notes. Okay? It's more visually apparent because of the white notes on the keyboard and the black notes. So if I start with C, the next note actually up from that is the black note. So that becomes a C, and they call it sharp if it's the note above C. But then we get back to this normal thing where we make the next one D, and that's the next white note. And then we got, from D, we got a D sharp. And then we got an E. But now, from 5 to 6, there's no black note in there. So we go straight to that next letter, which becomes F, okay? And then we got an F sharp. And then we got G. And because of this 7 note and 5 note, we start over after G. and that's because it's the 7th letter, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? So then I got a G sharp, I got an A, I got an A sharp, and I've got a B. Okay, so now our white notes end up being kind of sounding simpler because it's just C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. All right, so if I play those notes, here's what that sounds like. And that ends up being the major scale. Now, if I play all of the notes, that's called the chromatic scale, if you play every note. And a lot of times you'll go up chromatically, meaning you play every note between 2 points, okay? So, and then just to kind of reiterate here, the black keys, I'm going to just draw a black key around these. And you'll see this pattern where you've got 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 black notes, and 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the white notes. The distance between these notes becomes what's called an interval. So between the C, C sharp, and D is a whole step because it's made up of 2 half steps. Once again, the numbers 1 through 12 up here, those are half steps. So when I do 2 half steps, make a whole. So when I do a whole step from C to D, I'm going to put a W because that's a whole step. When I go from D to E, that's also a whole step. But E to F, since there's no black note there, that's a half. So I'm going to put a little H there. Then F to G, once again I have a whole. G to A, whole. A to B, whole. And you don't see it here, but if I wrote the next one, which would be starting over here at 1, it's a half step from B to C, so I'm going to put a H. So here's the magic of what's called the major scale. I got a whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That pattern then can be transferred to any scale by what note you start on. The next scale that's the easiest to see is G, and that's because it only has 1 black note. So C is all white notes. Any other scale is going to have some amount of them. But it really comes down to this whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? So we're going to jump into G on a keyboard here. And to get that same sound, and here's what it's going to sound like. Now, you'll notice that the F sharp in that was the only one that was sharp. So let's find out why that happened. So a whole step from G, I go to G, G sharp, and then I come up to A. From A, a whole step up, I go to B. Now I just want to do a half step. Well, on the keyboard, it turns out this one happens to be where there's no fret there, again, just like there was in the C, but that goes from B to C this time. Okay? Whole step up from there is D. Whole step is E. Another whole step this time. Once I'm at the E here, you'll see that the whole step takes me into that black key. So it becomes an F sharp. So F sharp becomes the 7th note in that scale. Better talk about this in case you are new to sharps and flats. I called this a C sharp because it went up from C to get there, so it's sharpening the note going up. Now coming backwards, this note would also be a D flat. So this note is D flat. The one way to kind of think of that is if you have a woman who has a mother and has a daughter, the daughter, I mean, it's the same person, it's one person. The daughter looks up to her and calls her mother. Same person though, this mother looks down at her and calls her a daughter. Same person, 2 different ways of saying it. Mother, daughter. So C sharp and D sharp, D flat. The reason I brought all that up is the next easiest scale ends up being the F scale, which has 1 flat in it. I'm going to draw that one out real quick. So it's F, and we still got the whole half, whole half is the rule all the way through here. So F, G, A. F, G, A is our F, our whole. But now I got to do this half step, and from A there, it goes to this black note, and once again, it could be called an A sharp, but in this case, and there's a reason why that we'll get to once we kind of talk about the circle of fifths, but this becomes a B flat. So we're going to call that a B flat today. B flat. Now I got the whole note. I got C, D, E, and then my last half goes between that E and F. So B, C, D, E, and then the half would get me up to that F again. Okay, so that's the F scale. There's one black note in this one black note in this one. So if I go from a G to an A, that's an interval of just a one whole step, right? But if I go from G to the B, I'm doing a third. And where does that number come from? So once again, we started with 1 through 12, but now we're going to reshift our focus, and we're going to do that again later one more time, but we're going to shift our focus to a new number system that now makes this the 1, this the 2, this the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so our major scale there has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now my interval between the first and the third one, you call that interval a third. It's a fourth if I go to there, it's a fifth if I go to there, and a sixth and a seventh. So these intervals sound different. Each one sounds a little bit different. So here in a G, so the second interval, those two are side by side, it has a little bit of tension, but the third, it's kind of a happy, nice sound. The fourth is nice and kind of wants to suspend and give you a little bit of tension to get back to that one. And then the one that's the most common throughout different scales beyond the major scale is a fifth. And there's what a fifth sounds like. That's my G and D that I'm playing at the same time. The sixth sounds like this. And then the seventh sounds like that. And back, once I play two Gs, that's called an octave. Now the word octave might make sense. Octagon, 8 sides. It's number 8. Okay? So that's where the word octave comes from. Now, that's intervals. To build a chord is at least 3 notes, and that's usually called a triad whenever you do that. In building our first chords, we kind of do the odd numbers first. So let's do a 1, 3, and 5. So that's a 1, a third, and a fifth above it. That ends up being called a major G chord. It's just G if it's major. All right. But when I start with now, I'm going to do even 2, 4, and 6. That's an A minor chord. And that third in the middle is what kind of gives that. If that had been a C sharp in the scale, which it's not, but if it had, that would have been an A major note. But in this key, C is not sharped, so therefore it's A minor. And then, so I just want to write by this, that's a G if I play that chord. So a G chord is, let's see, I'm going to say G is G, B, and D, right? My A chord is A, C, and E. And now I'm going to go to this B chord here, and it becomes a B, and I don't know the odds again, 3, 5, and 7. B, D, and a F sharp. Well, let's hear how that one sounds. So that's B, B, D, and F sharp. Once again, that's a minor chord. And then the minor, like I said, it's all about how many intervals there are between the root note of that chord and the third. Okay, so I'm going to erase this, but this is kind of showing us how these chords are built. This one's called a G chord. Whenever it's minor, they put a little M for minor, so that's a minor chord, and this would be a B minor chord. So G is a G chord, if I do the 3 notes. This one becomes A minor, 3 is a B minor. Let's see what the 4 ends up being. It's a 4, 6. Now the 8 is the octave, so that's going back to this. So I've got a C, E, and G. And that is a C major scale, or C major chord. So that's major. So there's no minor sign put beside that. The D becomes D, F sharp, and A. So it's major. The 6, E, G, and B. Once again, you have to kind of wrap around to be able to get that. But like I said, the keyboard just keeps, it's a pattern that keeps starting over. So this becomes E, and it's a minor. All right. The 7 is, the 7 chords are always the problem child because they kind of sound strange. But this, in this case, it'd be an F sharp, an A, and a C. So it's used, not often, in a lot of popular songs, but when you can get to break the rules, it's a lot of fun. And this one comes in handy. But this one's called a diminished, and that's mostly because the 5th normally wants to be that C sharp in this case, but we diminish the 5th because that's what's in the key. So this becomes an F sharp, and then the symbol for diminished is a little circle like that. Okay? Capiche so far? So there's the chords in a G that go together. So you may have been playing these chords together and looking for why this chord works with this one and why this one works with this one. But once you understand that those are the ones that are in a key, and I'm going to get the guitar out because in the key of G, these are some chords that are just in many popular songs. So if I'm playing G, to play that 5 chord is a D, and then the 4 chord is a C. So you can build a whole song with 1, 4, 5 chords. And then if you add that 6, it just changes it. See how that just gave it a different feel? But then the A minor in there is really nice. But you see why maybe. But then going to this chord is wrong. It's not wrong, it's just not in the key. It should have been this. And actually, F sounds good. That's breaking the rules, but there's a reason behind that, and that comes into modes. We'll talk about that at some point. Once again, on the keyboard, it's the same story, same 12 notes, same key that we have here. So the G, that's the 1, 4, 5 chord. But then that minor, 6, 5, 4. It just so I think the main thing I really wanted to establish with this video was the fact that as much as it might be a conglomeration of a whole bunch of notes here, there's a pattern, and this pattern is based between an octave. So in this case, we've been talking about G, the notes between there, and then they repeat. Like I can play, and I do want to talk about real quick inversions. C, E, G is our basic C chord. But if I play the notes out of that order, C, E, and G, and move this C up to the next one, that's called a first inversion. It's still a C chord, but the notes are now in order of E, G, and then C. Second inversion, move this E up to its next octave. So now I'm playing G, C, and E. Still a C chord, but it's called C second inversion. And then if I were to invert it again, it would be third inversion, but you don't call it that because now it's back up to, since it's a triad, we've done that 3 times, now we're back up to just the standard C, E, G chord. All right? That's inversions. And sometimes they, so the bass note, playing along with that, usually when you're playing a C chord, the bass is one to play that root note. So the root note of C is the C, right? But maybe when I do this inversion, I want the bass to kind of do that lower note of the E. So you hear how that sounds. So now I'm playing a C first inversion with an E in the bass. That's usually written C, with a slash and then E to show it's E in the bass. Whether you're playing the inversion, because it sounds, you don't necessarily have to have the inversion part for the bass to do that. And then the next one would be a C over G. And the song that I love that has that in it is Rocket Man by She Packed My Bags Last Night Pre-Flight. With the end of that, he plays an F chord, but he plays it over the A, which is the 3 of the F chord, and he climbs up to C, which is the 5 of that chord, and then resolves it on. So it kind of ends up sounding like let's see, coming out. My bags last night pre-flight, and I'm gonna be high. And then right here, there's a cat by then. See, there's the F over A, F over C. See how nice that sounds? So it's a F over A, F over C, F over F. Love that. All right, back to this G chord. I want to tell you one more thing that's a little bit confusing that might clear some things up. We started with this number system, the 1 through 12. We switched to this number system, the 1 through 7. Well, that's the key that has the 1 through 7, but every time I start a new chord, I have another number system that I'm going to be introducing, and it's really related to this 1 through 7 here, but it's more chord specific. So in the G chord that we have here, which was G, B, and D, G, B, D, in that chord I'm playing the 1, the 3, and the 5 of that chord, so it makes sense there because that's the root. But when I go to the C chord, I'm playing the 4, 6, and 8. 6 and 8. But for that chord, I kind of start over again and make the C the 1. And the 3 for this chord is E. And the 5 for this chord is G. And that's because it's a third interval and a fifth interval there. And this is where we start adding more notes into a chord than just the 3. A lot of times we want a 4-note chord that's a 7 chord. So start easy. The G, B, D, we add that 7, which is an F sharp in this case. You see, that's what a G7 sounds like. Right? And an A minor 7 is really nice. And you see how those two chords go together well. But that's, how can I call it a 7 in the G chord? That makes sense because it is a 7 of that one. But when I do an A minor 7, I'm adding the A, C, E, and the 8 ends up being the G again, right? So in this case, it's a 1 here, but from the theory of relativity, from the standpoint of the A, this G is a 7 because it's going up the scale. So the 2 would be adding the B in there. And that's kind of ominous sounding on a minor chord, but on a major chord, it's a really nice sounding. So adding the 2 note in there is another color that you can add to your songwriting. Now, one more thing in theory that I want to say is these numbers are made Roman numerals to make it more clear when you're talking theory. And if it's a major chord, they make it a capital Roman numeral. So this G becomes a capital 1. The 2 chord, since it's minor, it's lowercase. So you do 2 lowercase 1s. The 3 chord is minor, once again, so it's got written in lowercase. The 4 is capital because it's major. The 5 is capital. The 6 is minor, so it's a little V, I. And the 7 is diminished, so it's a lowercase too. V, I, and then we put the little circle for the diminished. So that's basically how music theory annotates this whenever we're talking. And progressions, once again, I want to come back to, this is where the Nashville number system thrives. And we'll do that in a whole separate video, but it just kind of talks through these numbers. So a very basic song is a 1-4-5 progression. So I play 1 for a measure, and I go to the 4 chord for a measure, and then I go to the 5 chord for a measure. So it's 1-4-5. Well, I might do a 1 to 5 to 6 to 4, for example, and that sounds fine too. Once I get into this number system, though, I can now I switch keys a lot easier. So if I say I want to play 1, 4, 5, and what key are we in? Oh, we're in the key of G, so that's G, C, D. But if I slide back up here, and I'm in the key of C, oh, up here it is. If I'm in the key of C, my 1, 4, 5 is C, F, and G. So now in this key, that's 1, 4, 5. So the numbers transpose across all of the keys. All right, and then in future videos, I think this is where I want to kind of stop with this one, but I do want to kind of introduce some more concepts that we can launch off of from here. We've been talking about the major scale, but these same chords and these same notes, there's different modes that you can go into, and they're so beautiful to write under those. The major key is the happiest one. The saddest one is the minor key, and it's the relative minor. And it really is, like I said, these same chords, but we're going to start on the 6 and call it 1. And I just gave you a quick example of what that sounds like. So key of C, we'll make it easy, all white notes, right? So in the key of C, if I'm starting on C, and when I end there on C, it's a upbeat, positive sounding. Same notes, same chords, but I'm going to start with the A minor chord, and A minor ends up being the relative minor of C, is what they call it. So same notes, but now listen how sadder this sounds. Same chords, just a different mode. And there's other modes that we'll get into. Dorian, and Dorian's a fun one. Lydian's a fun one. Mixolydian. That's the one thing with those. Just real quickly, I'll at least show you that the A minor in this key of G, for example, it's still a minor, so this becomes our 1 now. This diminished becomes a 2 diminished. And then we start back over here, we got a 3, and it becomes major. So I draw it, see how the numbers now. My 4 is minor, IV. My 5 is minor, so it's a lowercase v. And my 6 is major, so VI. And my 7 is major, VII. Beyond modes, the one other thing that we'll get into that's really fun is this circle of fifths. And this talks about how you can get all of the keys by, I'll give you a sneak preview of it. Start with C, and there's no sharps and no flats. If you go this way around the circle of fifths, this shows all the keys. Well, if I have just one sharp, and that's the next one we talked about, that one sharp ends up being the F sharp on the scale. So that becomes a G, and that's a fifth between C and G. But now if I'm in the G scale, a fifth for that becomes D, and it has 2 sharps. And then go from D to A, and it's got the 3 sharps, and on and on. We'll kind of show how that relationship starts. The irony of going backwards is I go from C to F, and this is now the flats on this side. So there's 1 flat, it's F. If there's 2 flats, it's B flat scale. And one last little interesting tidbit of this is a guitar goes up a fourth, or the strings are a fourth apart as you look at them, which ends up going down. So if I've got, you'll see that these are the notes of guitar: E, A, D, and G. Obviously that B string messes everything up, but you'll see how those are arranged that way. However, a violin kind of goes the other way, G, D, A, E, and that's because those strings are a fifth apart. So we'll cover that one in a future video. So once again, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please feel free to hit the like, subscribe if you haven't already, and look forward to seeing you in future videos. Once again, this is Mark Greenawalt, 12-Note Design. Great to have you on a music theory course. Take care, and we'll see you next time.